way. So at this point, we're going to shift our discussion to the nature of struggle itself and how to work with it. Struggle's been defined as a continued effort to resist force or to free oneself from constraints. It's a dictionary definition. The core struggle for most of us is that we want things to be different than they are. We don't want fear and intense negative emotions. We don't want to become sick and die. We don't want the incomprehensible violence in this world to continue, and so on. Very understandable. Neurotic struggle, then, could be understood as a continued effort to resist reality or to free oneself from its constraints. We could imagine finding ourselves in prison, maybe unjustly accused and convicted, and we're there for life. Now our question is, well, now what? How do we relate to this injustice, this fact that I'm in prison now? We can either struggle against the reality that we are unfairly in prison, but that doesn't get us out of prison. It's possible that, in fact, we may end up feeling even more claustrophobic and enraged and basically in hell. It does serve, though, to distract us from the deep grief and powerlessness that we would have to feel if we were actually to acknowledge that this is the truth of our situation. All of us, in fact, are imprisoned, we could say, in the constraints of body, gender, our history, race, life and circumstances, and so on. And most of us struggle as a type of distraction, so we don't really have to consciously participate in what it's like to be so claustrophobic, so imprisoned, so constrained by reality. We really are holding on to our fantasies of a life without limitation. So neurotic struggle has a function. It's not just a bad idea. It serves a purpose. And until we're ready to be present, embodied, kind toward the truth of our experience, which is very disturbing on a certain level, we will have an investment in maintaining neurotic struggle because of its distractive function. To maintain struggle, to be most effective, a strategy of resisting reality will have several features. One is that it will operate at a basically unconscious level, because if we're aware of what we're defending against, it's not such a great defense. It will adequately incorporate our actual experiencing without directly working with it. So, for example, I work with many people who in some way or another say, yes, I really want to work with that issue. I really want to get to the depth of things. And that's their claim. So they are claiming that they really want to work with their core vulnerabilities, but then there's always a reason. I'm not ready for it yet. It's too scary. My life circumstances are really pretty busy, and now's not a good time. My partner doesn't support me, and so on. And a third quality will be that this strategy for resisting reality is self-perpetuating, meaning it has its own life. We don't have to keep attending to it once it's set in place. And this is the elegance of struggle. Although we consciously believe we want to resolve our struggles, our unconscious investment is actually to guarantee their continuity in order to maintain the avoidant functions that they serve. By acknowledging the actual existence of our disowned energies, but placing them in the unworkable version of dangerous and overwhelming fear, we can believe we're really dealing with reality, but are just not ready to go too deep. And our refusal to acknowledge reality creates the experience of alienation and disconnection, which generates chronic anxiety, which provides a continuing sense of imminent threat, which activates our distrust of ourselves and of life, which then justifies our various styles of not being open to reality, which then generates alienation, and so on. So struggle is an incredibly complex, effective way to pretend to ourselves that we're really dealing with our life, we're really trying to solve these symptoms, these problems, if only whatever, and simultaneously guaranteeing that nothing will really happen. struggle operates on three distinct levels. We could call them content, process, and basic. All three levels operate simultaneously, though one's energetic sort of investment tends to progress from content to process to basic when one is committed to some path of waking up. This progression could also be understood as a movement from disowning energies to owning energies to experiencing energies without either owning or disowning. The content level of struggle concerns specific fears and disturbances. It's about improving the story of one's life, about successfully eliminating the problems which seem to threaten us. In the therapeutic view, it is about pre-neurotic experiencing. That's before we've achieved the capacity for stabilized, repressive, dissociative function. And again, this is usually an achievement around 4, 5, 6 years old for most people. So without these skills and structures which allow us to stabilize repression, we have to then address an endless succession of life circumstances to try to soothe our anxiety, to make us feel safe. Some among an almost limitless number of strategies might be to guarantee a certain distance in relationship, which then, of course, helps us not feel too anxious about too much intimacy and vulnerability. Another strategy is to project our disturbance onto other people. So we're always trying to solve our issues through other people. Denial, distraction, stress management, exercise, meditation, all of these can be used basically to try to soothe our anxiety. Supportive life circumstances. Most people actually unconsciously spend their lives trying to create life circumstances that will feel supportive and positive and not provoke their anxiety. Of course, one of the problems is that the more successful we are at co-creating life circumstances that feel safe, then sooner or later we start to feel more dead because we're not engaged with the spontaneity and unpredictability of things. As we will discuss in the relationship session, what we often end up doing then is to hire a partner who is sort of the representation of the other, of what we can't control. The benefit is that we then feel more aliveness to give us some relief from this safe little world we've created. But the flip side of that coin is that this person is a threat to our safety and our comfort. So then we end up with a very complicated, ambivalent relationship to this person in our life. In the Buddhist view, the content level can be seen as working with the story about what we're trying to possess or avoid or ignore. These are the three styles of fundamental aggression that we've discussed before. At this stage, we're still trying to manipulate our life so that we feel safe and secure. In both of these views, the goal of relating directly to open awareness is seen as a possible future achievement, because one's sense of self is seen as basically problematic. A continuing struggle to eliminate problems and heal wounds, dissolve obstacles, and feel good about oneself is accepted without examination. Of course, that's what it's about. My whole life is about trying to feel good and avoid feeling bad. The process level of struggle concerns the experiential atmosphere created by splitting off conscious from unconscious, mind from body. And this is actually, in other words, the accomplishment of neurotic organization, which has incredible benefits, but the price tag of a stabilized sense of discomfort that's not really associated with any specific content at this point. It comes from feeling split against oneself in an ongoing way. So at the first level of struggle, we tend to focus on life circumstances as the cause of our difficulty, and anxiety sort of comes and goes. When things are going well, we feel okay. When they're not, we don't. But that's a little bit like being a child at the mercy of the parents' moods. So as soon as possible, most of us learn to suppress our disturbance in an ongoing way, which of course then leads to ongoing or chronic anxiety. But at this level, enough confidence has been gained that we can take on the project, if interested, in recovering experiential ownership of that which has been disowned. We feel stable enough, safe enough, sort of self-contained enough that we don't feel just at the mercy of immediate circumstances. We feel some degree of trust in ourselves. Because we've developed the sense of being an adequately intact self, we can now risk relating to other in a more confident way. And this is the realm of most Western depth therapies, where the basic intention is to make conscious that which has been unconscious. So most Western therapies are focused on an exploration about what got repressed when we were young, growing up, what is still repressed, and can we start to bring that out into open awareness with the benefit of feeling more integrated as a person. Of course, one problem is that we will never make all of our experience conscious. There's a lot of research that seems to be consistently supported in the last 20 or 30 years that 95% roughly of what we experience never arises into conscious awareness. Massive amounts of experiencing, processing, decision-making is being made without any conscious participation. So we can practice an attitude of being receptive to our unconscious experience. But I think it's extremely unlikely that we will ever be fully conscious of everything we're experiencing. So this is an unending project, and some therapies, in fact, seem unending. In the Buddhist view, this level of process can be seen as working with the tendency to subtly define and orient oneself based on emotional energy, to confirm one's existence based on the experience of other. That can be other in a relationship, or most subtly, it's other in terms of sort of how am I doing relating to, let's say, my anxiety, my fears, my sanity. But there's still this sense of split that's going on, although it's much better. In both views, there's an increasing sense of confidence, but there usually remains an identification with one's conscious experiencing and a subtle investment in the project of improvement, in the struggle to be more fully alive, more embodied, more present, more wakeful. Of course, all of those things are wonderful, and beneath the display, there's still the sense of project, as if who I am in this moment is somehow deficit, somehow not quite okay yet. It's not quite okay for me to show up fully in my life, to engage. The basic level of struggle concerns the way in which this unending display of our experience is unconsciously used as a distraction from the nature of open mind. What I mean is that, let's say, to return to the metaphor of the movie, when we're captured by the movie, we completely lose any sense of awareness of the environment within which that movie is being shown. The more fascinating the movie, the more complete we are captured. So all of us seem to be fascinated with the endless display of thoughts, feelings, hopes, fears, engagement with our perceptions, the whole deal. And it is unconsciously used as a distraction from open mind, awareness, whatever we want to call that larger context of open intelligence and perception, because, once again, that open experience that has no qualities that can ever be grasped provides absolutely no support for personal identity. This level of struggle is usually not addressed by mainstream Western therapies because of the largely unquestioned belief in a separate self. So psychotherapy, of course, is organized around the effort to improve one's experience of the self. But it's pretty straightforward. But in the Buddhist view, this question of how the relative experience of form and limitation is related to the absolute experience of open mind and freedom is the focus of the fruitional view. Having described these three levels of content, process, and basic levels of struggle, perhaps it would be helpful to just give some examples of how this may actually show up in clinical work. Actually, a number of people that I've worked with have moved through the first two levels quite well. It's more rare that somebody sort of gets the third level, but some people become very interested in that question. So it's very common at the beginning of somebody's therapeutic work that they are looking outside of themselves for either the cause of their problems or the solution to their problems. This is most vivid for me in relationship work, but it happens for everyone. But let's say that in many couples that I work with, the initial presentation when a couple first comes in is that each person basically is blaming the other person for their experience. And so their unconscious solution that they have in mind, sometimes it's not so unconscious, is that you should change so that I don't feel disturbed. And it's often accompanied by a whole list of what's wrong with the other person. What that person, those two people, don't understand is that by placing the cause of their disturbance outside of themselves, they're missing the opportunity to develop the capacity to deal with their own disturbance. They're basically saying, my life would be so much better if only you would be who I want you to be and not who you are. Of course, that's something of a formula for chronic conflict and actually some very destructive experience in relationship. So this first level of content has to do with our efforts to change the world, to change our life circumstances in a more sophisticated way, to change our feelings so that we will feel safe, less anxious, happier. When a person, or let's say this couple, has adequately practiced personal responsibility, is curious about the fact that their disturbance seems to be something they've lived with actually their whole life. They can remember as a child feeling unloved or like they had to be the junior parent or whatever their issue was. They start to realize that actually this is an issue that I have within myself, and it's being triggered very intensely in this relationship, which is what relationships do. But this person, my partner, is not the cause and so will not be the solution. At that point, that person, or hopefully both people in the relationship, become interested in, well, seeing how I'm stuck with these difficult feelings, maybe I should investigate them and learn to work with them. Perhaps I actually will feel more personal power if I stop putting my well-being in somebody's hands who I have no real control over. So this is the work that is sort of the meat and potatoes of Western therapy. It's the work that most therapists do, of trying to dissolve this stabilized struggle within ourself between what we consciously want to feel and what we are unconsciously afraid we will have to feel, and of course, which life triggers. In therapy, the first type of work, based more on trying to have good experiences, is considered pre-Oedipal work. It has to do with support, with calming anxiety. And so working with a person at that pre-Oedipal level of experiencing, where they're still trying to only feel good, appropriately requires the therapist to be very supportive, maybe even be a bit of a cheerleader, to not confront them too much, teach them very concrete life skills, and basically be sort of a soothing parent from that point of view. When somebody enters the stage of organization of process, where they realize that their unresolved issues, their vulnerabilities, are their responsibility to work with, then the therapist's job actually shifts quite a bit, which is into what is called uncovering work, which provokes anxiety. The intention is actually to bring up exactly what that person doesn't want to feel. So even though many people in therapy begin with the unexamined agenda that I only want to feel happy, why can't a marriage only feel positive and supportive? If they progress in their work, most people in my experience somewhat naturally go into a willingness to look into their own unconscious. And it comes out of a confidence that comes out of the willingness to be responsible for our own experience. So at that level, when I'm working with somebody, I start to experience that person as actually manifesting as an adult now. They're saying, oh, well, this sucks. I hate this. This is hard. But, you know, I got it. This is really my issue, isn't it? And so at that point, the therapeutic work is to, in an appropriate way, keep bringing up anxiety-provoking issues so that that person gets the opportunity to investigate them for themselves and see, is it actually a problem? Some people I work with, usually people who have some practice, some spiritual practice, but sometimes I'm completely surprised by somebody who seems to be completely naive about therapy or spiritual practice. But some people just seem to be immediately curious about the question of, well, what is the nature of awareness? What has been aware of all this drama I've been going through? For some people, it's almost like a little light bulb goes off or a shift of perspective happens. And they start saying, yeah, that's really interesting. You know, if I check into my experience, I think I can get it that my experience isn't disturbed when I'm disturbed. I can even feel it a little bit, that my awareness is not disturbed when I am feeling disturbed. That's really interesting. So some people, and I can never predict who, actually seem to have a certain type of instinctual resonance with that level of experiencing. But that's not the usual work in therapy. So we've been talking about a progression of movement, a path from content to process to basic levels of struggle. Another way of talking about this progression, which is very necessary for most of us, that we go through these stages, is the biological metaphor of interiorization. In biology, over the course of evolution, organisms have gradually displaced their vital functions from the outside, the exterior, progressively inwardly to the interior. So a more primitive life form, let's say like a single-celled amoeba or something, is incredibly dependent upon its environment. If the salinity of the water changes, it's dead. But by the time you're getting to mammals and humans, most of the very vital functions are inside the body. And that allows that being to adapt to an incredibly wide range of environments and life circumstances. So as a metaphor, this progression that we're discussing could be understood as a process of interiorization, where we're gradually locating our sense of self, of well-being, in a more and more and more interior way, and less dependent on life circumstances, most of which we really don't have much control over. So as our location of well-being becomes more interior, we actually are able to maintain a good state of mind in a wider range of experiences. In the last discussion, we talked about this idea of learning to have a good state of mind regardless of circumstances. So as we move in a direction that is less and less dependent on circumstances, of course, that capacity is cultivated. Working in either the therapeutic or the Buddhist way at this level involves the same intention of relaxing struggle. Relaxing struggle dissolves the apparently significant dramas of resolution we create. As we gradually allow our various hopes and fears to coexist simultaneously, we find there is in fact no resolution necessary or even possible. Experiencing the immediate reality of our worst fears doesn't kill us, while experiencing the immediate reality of our greatest hopes doesn't save us. Both are only transient energies which arise, dwell, and fall away. Being equally willing to consciously participate in either negative or positive feelings, we begin to cultivate an attitude of non-bias. Without the stabilized contraction of attention, which creates a stabilized sense of self, we find that not knowing who we are does not make us dysfunctional, but instead gives rise to the experience of freedom, unconditional confidence, and open-heartedness. On an even deeper level, relaxing struggle may give rise to an experience of empty nature, because solidity actually is maintained by struggle, which is based on fundamental aggression toward reality. So as we relax struggle, the immediacy of our experience becomes more and more vivid to us. It doesn't mean that we lose our capacity to plan for the future or remember the past. It doesn't mean that our relative experiencing somehow is lost. It just means that now there's this experiential dialogue going on at all times, where our thoughts, our plans, our strategies arise, and simultaneously we are increasingly aware of our immediate experience, which has no quality of problem to it. So, as we do this work, we may find that habitual patterns actually give rise to an experience of openness. Complaints give rise to a sense of what could be called natural perfection. It doesn't mean everything's perfect like we like it, or it couldn't be improved. It just means at any given moment, there is no alternative reality. At any given moment, that's it. It's as it is. So it's perfect in the sense of being complete and unitive at that moment. The next moment, of course, things will change. And our basic attitude of strategy may start to give rise to spontaneity. So if there were one point that I would hope that you might consider from this discussion, I think it would be to consider the practice, which is counter-instinctual, of committing to and welcoming the experience of anxiety as an approximation of open mind. And to be very, very curious about whether, despite all of our biological inheritance, the experience of anxiety actually is an accurate signal that our survival is at risk. So our next discussion will be about body awareness.